Okay, so hello, hello to you, and welcome to that IPBA webinar. We're really happy to see you, although we are not seeing you, but we know we have lots of friends from the community here. So today we're going to do a webinar basically on where we are today and what's the future of work on employment and various jurisdictions with that pandemic situation. To co-moderate the webinar, we are lucky enough to have Veena Gopalakrishnan with us, who's a vice chair of our employment committee and is also a partner of the employment practice of AZB Partners in Bangalore, India. Hello, Veena.
Hi, Fred, and I am so delighted to be part of this webinar, to be co-moderating it with you. Our lovely Fred is a partner at Harley Law, which is a leading law firm in Paris, and she heads up the employment law practice there. Fred and I met many years back at the IPBA conference, and I'm so delighted to be part of this group.
And now, before we begin, we're going to have some introduction remarks from our president, Jack Lee.
Distinguished colleagues and guests, I thank IPBA officers for organizing this timely seminar, taking place under the devastating impact brought out by Covid-19 pandemic. I do appreciate the joint efforts and collaborations from all members and officers working for IPBA during such a difficult time. Today, our Employment and Immigration Law Committee hosts a webinar to discuss the concern currently being faced by organizations due to the pandemic. The webinar will bring together employment law experts from China, France, India, Italy, Singapore, the United States, to discuss the most pressing issues relating to employment law. Ladies and gentlemen, before closing my words, I would like to invite more and more delegates to join our IPBA to become a member, a Jurisdictional Council member, JCM, committee chair, vice chair, and officer. IPBA is a big family among our commercial lawyers in the world. With your strong support and kind assistance, IPBA will doing more, better, and faster amidst changes and challenges. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jack, for that introductory remarks. So without further ado, we're gonna go into the webinar and present the group of great speakers we have today. First we have Caroline Knox, who's the chair of our employment committee now. And she's the partner with the employment department with Ogletree and Dickens in San Francisco, California. Hello, Caroline.
Hello, Fred. Thanks. And one thing we're going to do instead of talking about our backgrounds is we're all going to tell one fun fact about ourselves. My fact is not that fun. Those of you who know me know this fact, but I am 6 feet tall, which is 1.83 meters without wearing any heels. So at the next IPBA meeting, just look for the tallest person in the room, and that might be me.
Thank you. So just a tip, it cannot be me, so.
Thank you, Caroline. We have with us a very delightful Sharon. Sharon really is an employment law specialist and co-founder and managing partner of Really and Teresa Tesoro employment law firm. Sharon, welcome on board, and we'd love to hear one fun fact about you.
Good morning, Veena, and everyone else. Delighted to be here. And my kind of fun or quite kind of unusual fact is I am Scottish. I am the only Scottish lawyer practicing Italian employment law in Italy. And I joined the IPBA last year thanks to Fred introducing me to it, and should have spoken at Shanghai, but we all know how that ended. So yeah. Good morning and delighted to be here.
We will one day, guess.
We will, absolutely.
We also have Jenny Tsim, who's part of the employment practice with One Partnership in Singapore. And Jenny, apart that you are a unicorn sometimes, do you have, do you have a fun fact for us?
Yes, thank you, Fred. And that unicorn joke was in reference to me fooling around with the filters on Zoom just now. Well, the fun fact that I had wasn't very fun at the relevant time, but when this COVID situation first started and we were working from home, I thought to myself that it would be fun to be able to roll off my bed and onto the floor to work from my room. So what I did was I set up my own office, so to speak, with an upside down wine crate. But 1 year, 3 months later, I've already upgraded myself to a proper setup here with 2 monitors and all. But at that time, my back was killing me. So anyone who wants to think rolling off the bed onto your home office is a good idea, it's not.
Thanks for that. Very
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. And I will second that, because I think most of us have a bad back in the last 1 year now. We also have with us a recognized and acclaimed employment lawyer. He is the founding partner of River Delta Law Firm in Shanghai. Jason, would you tell us a little about yourself and one fun fact importantly?
Hello, Veena. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Actually, I have another very important meeting to attend just at the same time and at this webinar. So I booked a hotel room very close to the venue of that meeting, so that I can participate in this webinar in the hotel room first, and then rush to that meeting right after this webinar. It will take at most 6 minutes on the way. Now I'm in this hotel room, which is exclusively used for this webinar. Okay.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. I think most of us, a lot of us at least, have forgotten what a hotel room or a meeting room looks like. It's been very, very long now. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think I'm going to take a minute to go back in time to March 2020, when things started escalating in India and world over. And it has been a difficult time for in several countries with the number of COVID cases spiraling. Back in the day, we didn't really know whether to take this seriously or not. We were wondering what COVID appropriate behavior really meant. Today, we are staring at around 500,000 positive cases in India. The last couple of months were very bad, but now things are looking much better. Employers have progressed from reacting to the COVID situation to responding in a more meaningful manner with a futuristic outlook. And well, that is pretty much what we are going to be talking about during this webinar, the future. The future with relevance to how things are currently, but what is it that we're all going to be looking at in the next 2 years, in the next 5 years, in the next 6 months down the line? This is going to be some crystal ball gazing for now. Very interesting concepts around COVID leave, around furloughs, around working from home have sprung up, and that seems to be the next normal. It's not the new normal anymore, because we've been grappling with this for a while, but there is a drastic shift, and from what I'm seeing and hearing, this is the most dynamic workplace shift that has happened since the World War. So Fred, would you like to go ahead and take this over with the other panelists?
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind is maybe to have a very quick roundtable on what's the hot topics, what's the three main important facts to highlight of what happened and where we are today, and what could be the base of the future in each of your jurisdictions. Caroline, would you like to shoot first?
Sure, thanks, Fred. In the US, there really hasn't been an evolutionary change in employment laws because the US has already had laws, both federal and state, in place to deal, we didn't anticipate this, but to deal with crises like the pandemic and prior the global economic turndown. But we didn't certainly expect the sudden shutdown of businesses as a result of this pandemic. But I'd say the three big changes that we saw, one of them is coming to an end and the other two will move forward. One was the incredibly fast action by the US federal and state governments to pass economic measures to try to protect jobs. Usually the US does not try to do a federal program to actually protect jobs, and we did that. And that was unprecedented. The second was the ability of so many US businesses to switch overnight to remote work or to adjust how they worked so they could comply with health and safety laws that were just being implemented, and also continue on with business as usual. And I use that term loosely. But really the US was able to kind of recalibrate and continue to move forward. Our economy wasn't as impacted as I thought it would be. And the third issue is the prominence and now power of our federal and state health and safety laws. Unless you were in manufacturing and some other industries such as mining, businesses didn't pay as much attention to health and safety, and we certainly are now. And that will continue in the future.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. Jason, what about China? Is there a few main topics you want to highlight?
Okay. In China, there are three trends in the employment field which are noteworthy. The first trend is that the employment is becoming more and more flexible and diversified, including remote working, platform working, etc. The second trend is non-competition agreements are widely used, and the number of the relevant disputes has been growing fast. And the third trend is, despite the labor laws remaining unchanged, the attitude of the judicial practice has certainly changed from very employee-friendly to more balanced between employer and employee. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. What about Europe and specifically Italy, Sharon?
Yes, Fred. So, I mean, the headline news for the past 15 months in Italy has been this ongoing ban, that we have a blanket ban on redundancies for economic reasons. And this has only ever happened in Italy's history immediately after the Second World War. This ban is still in place today, will be lifted to some extent tomorrow, and finally lifted completely at the end of October. So that for us is a huge ongoing news. The second one is the cultural shift. So in Italy, pre-pandemic, only 5% of employees worked from home. This was ingrained in the culture. You're working from home, you weren't really working. Overnight, we found out that wasn't the case, and now we have 47% of Italian employees who are and will continue to work from home as the law allows them to until the end of this year. So let's say remote working has now become the norm. The third thing is the furlough scheme, which we'll look at later, but the furlough scheme, which existed in Italy pre-COVID for manufacturing, was rolled out across all sectors, regardless, as of March last year, and is still in place until October of this year. So that's my three hot topics.
Thank you very much, Sharon. So I guess all those points definitely are going to be the ones we are going to discuss. I don't know, Jenny, if it's something quite similar in Singapore.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. I think it's really quite similar across the world. The first thing that I wanted to highlight was that prior to COVID, I mean, employment laws, of course, do evolve with time. But with the COVID situation, when the government swiftly implemented new regulations and advisories, what employers suddenly found themselves was, hey, you know, I really have to keep up. I have to be agile. I have to learn and adapt to all these changes at unprecedented speeds. And that continues to be the case moving forwards beyond, you know, beyond 2021 as well, because circumstances keep changing. Number two, as the others have mentioned, work from has brought out a greater awareness of the on workplace safety requirements. I think Caroline mentioned that, but more specifically, I think the questions that now we're dealing with no longer is what happens if if a construction worker falls from a height and things like that. I mean, they happen, but the concerns that people have raised in this COVID environment would be things like, you know, the home as the workplace. Will you still be responsible? Will the employer be responsible if the employee falls over his son's Lego, for instance, that's placed on the floor while working from the work desk to the toilet, right? I mean, and that's from the home environment perspective. From the office environment perspective, you'll be looking at what kind of COVID prevention strategies need to be adopted to keep the workplace safe. We never had this kind of, you know, thinking to try and keep the workplace safe from the usual flu, for instance. But COVID has seen us having to look into this aspect. The third one from the work safety environment angle is an increasing concern into mental health issues. We can talk a lot more about that later on, but I think it's important to note that Singapore employees have sort of come to grips with the fact that we need to consider the mental well-being as well of employees. And beyond cost, the other thing I think Jason mentioned is disputes have grown, and that's something that we have seen also, because beyond the cost-cutting measures and furloughs of 2020, we're now seeing terminations more terminations in the shape of redundancies, and I expect to see that increase as well. And as a corresponding thing, I also have noticed an increased trend in the number of wrongful termination challenges. So those are the three big issues from my end of the woods. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That's a really interesting world tour of the issues we all have to face for our clients going forward. Vina, you want to take on?
Yes, thank you. And thank you. It is, I think that you mentioned world tour, I'd request all our attendees to use this opportunity or to ask questions and share insights with the wonderful panelists that we have. We have managed to put together a very global perspective here. With people from various jurisdictions, and I'd urge you to tap into the collective experience that we put together as part of this webinar. Now, moving ahead, it is extremely interesting to see how industries across various jurisdictions have found ways to cope with the pandemic and ensure business continuity to the extent possible. Remote working, like I mentioned, has become some kind of way of life, and for most organizations. But like we mentioned earlier, the manufacturing sector seems to have had some stress, and to enable social security and enable protection for workers, several governments brought into place bans on redundancy and bans on furloughs. So here's a quick poll for all our attendees on whether there are currently existing furlough redundancy bans in your jurisdiction. So there will be two polls. So we request you to take a minute to answer them.
And if you need to, elaborate on the quick answers we've put together, you could still go either through the Q&A question or through the chat channel, and we will have a look at it, and we'll try and make sure that your questions or remarks are taken care of during the webinar. I've seen from an anonymous person a question we're gonna answer in a moment. So that was the first poll. I guess, Rhonda, you could put up the second one. Oh, okay.
The results first.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. So most of the jurisdictions that are represented in our webinar from the panelists and the audience, it seems that lots of countries didn't put any furlough scheme in place. And for a big number of it, it's either finished or being finished. And for a third of it, it's going to continue, but for more than 3 months.
We have the next poll in progress.
So while we're doing that, are the redundancies banned? Maybe we could address the question of one of the person in the audience who's asking how does employment at will play, I'm sorry, play out in terms of redundancies being challenged? I guess Sharon and I will not answer that because we don't have the concept of employment at will in our jurisdiction.
I the only one with employment at will. I looked at that question. I'm actually not quite sure what is meant by the question. In the US, we have a law called the WARN Act that has to do with mass redundancies and notice and pay. It's not much, frankly, it's 60 days. People can have to work it or they're paid in lieu. But employment at will just means an employer can terminate an individual, or an individual may resign without any reason, so long as it's not a discriminatory reason. So if a company has planned a redundancy, they have every right to terminate. So long now through litigation, there are some parameters. You have to look at disparate impact on certain age groups of people or certain ethnic groups or certain gender groups, etc. But employment at will gives the ultimate freedom to the employer to make a determination about downsizing their workforce. If I understand your question correctly.
Thanks, Carolyn. That is useful. We'll take a quick look at the result of the second poll, which is we have about 23% saying yes, redundancy bans are being strongly enforced. In 7%, around 7.7%, not really enforced. 15% there are no bans, but redundancies are frowned upon, and about a whopping 53% there are no redundancy bans at all. This is a very interesting take, because I'll just give you a quick India snapshot. In terms of redundancies, there was a strict restriction that was introduced back in 2020, then that became took the shape of an advisory. Then the government tried saying you couldn't really reduce wages or change terms of employment to the detriment of employees, but ultimately I guess businesses have to do what they have to do, and which is why the 53% speaks for itself. Now, coming to the concept of furloughs itself, when we were putting this webinar together, what we did realize was the meaning of the word furlough seems to have different connotations across various jurisdictions. For example, the word furlough was fairly new to us in 2020, when we had clients come to us and saying, asking ask questions on, is it allowed? Can employers furlough their employees? A lot of us did end up looking it up to see what really does furlough mean. In the Indian context, there is a concept of layoff, which is not the colloquial firing, laying off employees, but it is asking an employee to stay back at home if in case of certain circumstances, such as depletion of raw materials, an act of God, or difficult circumstances, an employer can, without terminating employment, have the employer stay back at home and not work. And this is only for industrial establishments having more than a certain number of people. So it's a very limited window available, where employers would still need to pay about 50% of the wages. But for all other employees, if your establishment is shut down because of the lockdown, you do not have the privilege to work from home, then an employer would need to continue paying 100% of the wages. What is it like in France, Fred?
Yeah, so in France, the furlough scheme also existed for industries for a long time. And now it has been really improved during the pandemic. And we have that scheme from the government that time, which was that for employees who couldn't work from home, either totally or partially, they would be paid by the government. I mean, they would be paid by their employers, but the employers would be reimbursed by the government up to 70 to 80% of their salary. And it was the freedom of the employer to decide whether or not to top it up to 100%. So that is because it one of the jurisdictions where the furlough, meaning the financial help of the government, is still in place for 3 months or less for the time being, except for certain sectors where it's going to continue for a lot more because, you know, like, you know, discos or restaurants or, you know, let's say industries where they really took the hit. So Sharon, I guess you had a similar thing in Italy.
Yeah, so we have, obviously in Italy, we are quite close and similar to France in some respects. But this word furlough, prior to March 2020, nobody in Italy knew what furlough meant. And indeed, even in the UK, you know, this was an Americanism that came in, that was catapulted into our language. But basically, also in Italy, we had a furlough scheme pre-COVID, but only for manufacturing. This, as I say, was rolled out across sectors, and basically it's a state-funded scheme, so wholly state-funded, and they pay the employees' wages, but there's a cap, of course, of 80%. So, you know, at the height of the pandemic, 75% of businesses in Italy were using the furlough scheme. And of course, they had to show that they had a drop in their turnover. It wasn't automatically given. The businesses had to show that compared to the previous year, they had at least a 50% downturn in their business, and they could apply for and get the furlough scheme. Even today, the furlough scheme is still very much in place and will be until October. And at least around 30% of businesses are actually still using that scheme. So it's still very much part of Italian business life today. But the furlough scheme, and unusually, and I see that from the poll, you know, Italy is completely out of step with the rest of the world, not just Europe, in that we have a complete ban on redundancies, and this went hand in hand with furlough. As I say, there is, and you know, breach the ban at your peril, you know. Nobody would dare to breach it. The remedy, the penalty is reinstatement and damages. So you just don't go. You just don't go there. There is an exception to the ban with top-level managers who cannot be furloughed, and they can be dismissed. There's been some case law around that and some controversy. Again, there are some exceptions to the ban. If you're genuinely closing a business, then the ban doesn't apply, and you can obviously dismiss people. Okay. So that's it's basically created a false sense of security in Italy, you know, because we've created zombie companies that were maybe unhealthy pre-pandemic and have been shored up by the ban and by the furloughing. So we are waiting for, come October, a huge tsunami of redundancies across sectors in Italy. So it's going to be, be a painful period. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, I mean, at different various scales, but I think we're going to see that everywhere in the world where furlough was, really a way of artificially, not said in a wrong way, but, artificially.
Yeah. Yeah. And what it's also done, even the natural churn of turnover of employees in a business hasn't happened because you couldn't do that either. So it's frozen in time. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for that, Sharon. Maybe Jason, you can give us your views.
Well, we're waiting for Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. I see what I'm.
Since we apparently invented this, I'll jump into the fray because the Americans invent all the stuff about getting rid of employees. Furloughs have long been used by employers in the United States. Often they're used actually by governments, state governments, federal government, departments of federal governments to furlough individuals, particularly if our budgets haven't been passed, for example. But employers can use them as well. For us, really what it means is reduction in work hours or no work for a period of time with the intention of calling the employees back when things improve. We used it a lot during the global economic downturn. Although I was not in the United States then, it was used a lot. Support the individuals. Employers could continue to pay them. There was a federal program called the Paycheck Protection Act, which couldn't actually terminate people if you got that money, but people were terminated. But people's earnings were largely due to the state unemployment funds. So they would apply to their state for unemployment benefits. And then the federal government passed a measure that topped up those unemployment benefits. So really for us, a lot of lower wage earners were earning as much or almost as much or more than they were earning while they were working, which has created a problem because we're open for business and it is very difficult to fill those low wage earner jobs. Yeah. In California, we did pass a law because we're leaders in California, kind of anti-employer leaders. We passed a law that for those individuals who were furloughed during the pandemic, they have the first right of refusal when jobs reopen. But again, people are having trouble finding workers and or people who are reemployed elsewhere.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, it's we have a few challenges to face right now. For example, when we're talking about remote working or working from home, which is not exactly the same thing, but working outside the office, the usual office premises. That's something that everyone had to do if possible. I mean, at least not being in the office. And now we see, different trends on how would that be possible to get people coming back to work. Not speaking about health and safety, but just really practically in France, for example, we see a real trend of companies letting 30% of their square meters because they are organizing something, in with the trend of the employees that. They're not going to come to work as often as they used to do. Jason, how is it for you in China?
Yes, just like in other countries, the remote working is one of the most important ways to counteract the impact of COVID-19. As such, it has been extensively applied in China. Meanwhile, remote working also brings employers some challenges and concerns, among which productivity, confidentiality, and data security are the top three. Although remote working has been encouraged by the government and widely used by organizations since the occurrence of the pandemic, Until now, China has no special legislation, no official guidelines on remote working. Therefore, the management of remote working has to be undertaken in accordance with all the relevant laws and the regulations, including but not limited to labor law, the labor contract law, the data security law, and the civil code. While being used extensively, remote working is relatively new to most employers in China. To manage remote working legitimately, effectively, and securely, more and more employers tend to take both the technical meanings and the legal measures concurrently. In my experience, the most commonly used legal measures are signing an agreement with employees and establishing the employer's remote working policies, especially the latter. As a result, we can see the demand for such legal services at drafting the agreement and formulating and reviewing the employer's remote working policies having significantly grown since last year. Yes.
Thanks a lot, Jason. That's so interesting to see how different it is in various jurisdictions. Veena?
Sure. Thanks, Fred. In India, it's very similar. It's not regulated. The ability of an employee to work remotely. We've started seeing several issues around remote working include, and the most important one is productivity. Because there is no real start time, finish time. People wake up, get to work, and finish at whatever time it is possible or convenient to. So apologies, I'm having terrible internet day today, and I guess that is something that I've not been able to get used to ever since the pandemic started. Fred, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, you've been interrupted, but we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for bearing with me. And this is one of the real consequences of the pandemic, having to work remotely with possibly partly reliable internet. But yes, the concerns in India are very similar. The two major issues are, one is productivity and the second is burnout, because the one people believe that their days are stretched longer. There is the difference between working from home and family time is really blurred, and these are.
And now we can't hear you, Veena. So I think I'm going to ask Jenny to take in, and we'll see if you've got a better connection in a moment.
Sure, Fred.
Okay, thanks, Fred. In Singapore, remote working presently is the norm or is the default, and there are regulations in relation to this. But these rules and regulations, like I mentioned earlier, change very quickly. So currently, it is a response to the increase in COVID numbers a few weeks back. So presently, that's what the regulations provide. It is employers must ensure that all employees who are able to work from home do so. The thing about this also is, in the context of the regulations for remote working, there will also be regulations as to the number of persons or employees who can come to work in terms of a percentage. So that is another example of how things had actually moved up and down. At some point in time, it was 75% permitted back to the office. At some point in time, it went down to 50. At some point in time, it should be 0. So I mean, the challenges are the same: productivity, employee burnt out. How do you monitor employees, whether they are, if you're talking about things like appraisal, how do you monitor that? But I think from the Singapore experience, one thing that I wanted to flag is that the authorities or the regulators do take this requirement to comply with the existing regulations very seriously. So the Ministry of Manpower will conduct inspections at your workplace. You have your dawn raid, so to speak. People turn up to make sure that you don't have more number of employees than permitted in your office at any one day. which means what for employers? You have to keep proper records. You have to make sure that people sign in and sign out. And they are not just looking at whether you have, you're only permitted 5 people and you only have 5 people. They're also looking at whether or not you have adopted the safe measures for the workplace, which I alluded to earlier, to ensure that that workplace is safe, 1 meter apart, places that people can't go to, things like that, cleaning and all. And so if we come back to the remote working issue, between 9th of May to 21st of May, which is a 3-week period or 2-week period, more than 530 workplaces were inspected, and the newspapers report that 11 of the companies were fined for failing to ensure that their employees work from home. This amounts to a criminal offense with, and repeat offenders have an elevated or an enhanced punishment. So it is important, if you're looking at it from Singapore, to address, of course, the other issues relating to productivity, etc., but also to keep up to date with what the current rules are on remote working.
Yeah.
Fred, can I just jump in and make a quick comment as regards Italy? So one peculiarity around the remote working is, there's been a lot of discussion, is over the question of luncheon vouchers. So if people are working from home, are they still entitled to luncheon vouchers? And a huge amount of controversy and now some case law on it, believe it or not. And that then leads on naturally to fringe benefits. Going forward, if people are working from home permanently, are they also entitled to the company car, for example? And the last thing, and I'm sure Carolyn will have something to say on this, you probably saw that Morgan Stanley's boss came out and said last week, you only get New York salaries if you're working in the New York office. Obviously, in Italy, they couldn't touch your salary regardless of where you're working, but I wonder maybe in the States, if they're looking at going and renegotiating salaries depending on where you're actually physically working.
Do you want me to comment on that? Right now, there's a huge issue in the United States around disappearing employees. So people who have been working in the United States, but they're actually citizens of another country, many of them disappeared back to their home country without notifying the employer, for example. Employer continues to pay taxes in the US, in the state where they should be resident, etc., not knowing where they are or not asking, kind of see no evil, hear no evil. But also people just who stayed within the United States, and to Sharon's point, gone to another state, maybe a no income tax state or a more remote state where property values, a lot of Californians are leaving California, Northern California, because of the cost of living here. And people are starting to talk about recalibrating salaries because you don't have the cost of living issues in Wyoming that you do in Manhattan or San Francisco. Yeah. So yeah, big area of discussion. And just one little word, a lot of you were talking about productivity in the workday. I think it's important for anyone in the audience whose clients have operations in Latin America. All of the Latin American countries have developed remote work laws either prior to the pandemic or during the pandemic. And in some of those countries, Brazil is a great example, if someone is working remotely, they are no longer subject to what's called the hours regime. So they're not entitled to overtime. Yeah. Where conversely, in Argentina, the working hours are still controlled, and they adopted France's right to disconnect, as did Mexico. So there are some similarities in Latin America, but they have very robust remote working rules around wage and hour and health and safety, et cetera. So if you have clients operating there, be very aware of that.
That's very interesting to see how stretched that could be. So, Vina, would you like to add something?
Great. Yeah. Absolutely. So I think the concerns are pretty much cut across the globe in terms of similarity, and it's becoming very difficult in India to monitor work hours, and I guess that is something something that employers will need to figure out in due course. But it is also interesting that till before the pandemic struck, working from home was just a privilege that was given to young mothers, and everybody spoke about how it is twice the work and half the credit. But now it seems to be more like the norm, and I guess we'll all learn to work with more interesting and different styles. So that I think is one good thing, that we all know what it is to work from home as well. A very natural consequence of remote working is the extension of an employer's liability to the home office, and this is very this is just picking up on what Jenny said earlier today. Is what about nobody's really talking about a contractor falling off the 15th floor of a building, but talking about tripping on a Lego piece at home. So how much does the employer's liability extend to the home office? And in this context, we have two polling questions. Rhonda, may I request you to bring on the two questions, please? Requesting our attendees to just take a couple of seconds to answer these, and then we'll look at the answers.
And Jenny, you said you have frequent checking in real offices areas to see how it works. Do you have the same I mean, is it possible in Singapore that someone is ringing your bell at home to see how you're organized? Not that far.
It doesn't go so far as a general basis, I think, but it is possible. It hasn't happened to me yet, ever, but it's, you know, don't know how many of you know, but we are quite reliant on foreign domestic helpers. So many families will have ladies coming from Indonesia, Philippines, living in as foreign domestic helpers. And one of the things that the government also aims to do or seeks to do is to ensure, obviously, that conditions for them are proper, you know, treated in a correct fashion. So in that regard, it has been said that, you know, they may come and inspect.
Okay.
But generally, for the work from home for office employees, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe Rhonda, you have the results of our poll.
Oh, interesting to see that an employer could be liable for accidents, injuries that occurred while an employee was working from home. This is really interesting. Jenny, I'm going to request you to come in here and tell us about the risk of exposure for an employer in Singapore when employees work remotely, and your example was most interesting.
Yeah, I play with all these examples in my head. Yeah, I wonder if I started drinking at 10:30 in the morning and then I trip before noon, can I go to the employer? I'm not sure that I can. There is no specific legislation which tells you what you must or must not do in a home environment or home office environment. The general obligation to maintain the safe workplace actually remains. It extends out the same statute. It is clear to us, or at least in Singapore, that employees who are injured while working or while doing work at home, the employer can be liable. And it's very apparent because that's what the Minister for State had actually said when the question was posed. So indeed, I think it just becomes a fact-finding exercise. The question is really whether the injury arose in the course of doing work at home and not while performing unrelated activities. At the end of the day, how, you know, where the balance will lie, what the result would really be turning on the evidence. I think last year in June 2020, it was reported that the Ministry of Manpower is actually looking at and investigating into at least 2 work injury that occurred at home. So I don't know the results of those investigations as yet, but we do know that if you do suffer an injury at home, if you can show that it was in the course of work and prove that, then you can, you know, make the employer liable in that respect. The Lego, not so sure how that will fall. I think, yeah, to some extent. And I'm definitely
Yeah.
sure that day drinking is not going to cut it.
Well noted, Jenny. That is good information. We are going to take note of that. Jason, could you let us know your thoughts on this from a China perspective, please?
Yes, and I would share just one point from a China perspective. It's about the so-called flexicurity of employment relationship. The word of flexicurity is a combination of the word flexibility and security. In China, to combat COVID-19, the employers should ensure they keep their employment relationships secure and flexible. The word security has two meanings here. The first meaning is to ensure the maintenance of the employment relationship. And the second is to secure the payment of wages and social insurance. So during the pandemic, mass redundancies are rarely permitted by the government for state-owned companies. And for private companies, the government encourages and subsidizes them to avoid or limit redundancies as much as possible. To secure the payment of wages, the employers are required by the labor law of China to pay their employees the full wages for the first month, and then a monthly living allowance from the second month on board, even if the COVID-19 has forced them to suspend operations. And the word of flexibility, China's government believes that in the context of COVID-19, to maintain the security of employment relationships, flexibility is invaluable. Therefore, many policies have been instituted by the government to encourage and support employers and employees to make work contents, work hours, and leave, workplace wages, and salaries, etc., as flexible as possible. This can be either through collective negotiation or by mutual agreements between employer and employees. For example, some employers choose to give their employees 2 or 3 weeks of unpaid leave as a result of manual agreement. Yeah, that's
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Thank you. And this is very interesting. I think we've had some really interesting answers to this question, from liability for day drinking to flex security. We just have a very quick poll here on whether employers in your jurisdiction have the right to prescribe health and safety protections over and above the law. And this is particularly important when in both contexts. When employees work from home, can the employer prescribe basic requirements like the kind of seating and the kind of posture that one needs to follow? If one has to go to the workplace and offices have opened, are there basic requirements like thermal testing, COVID appropriate behavior? Are there periodic COVID testings that need to be done? So have, in addition to what the law requires, do employers in your jurisdiction have that right? We put up that poll, and if all of you answered, I'm going to request Rhonda to publish the results. Excellent. So employers are, and they can require health and safety measures beyond the law. Great. This is again very interesting information. And moving ahead, adjusting to the new normal and coping with the virus itself was something that was a topic for 2020. But now, to get back to the real normal, an integral part of the readiness is vaccination. Bloomberg tells me that as on date, there are about more than 2.97 billion doses of vaccines that have been administered. And this, I believe, is the biggest vaccination drive in history. So India launched its vaccination drive in January this year. We have about 19% of the country already vaccinated. The going is good, and we're waiting for things to get better. We have a very quick poll here on
Vina, I think I'm going to take it from
the
there.
employer rights when it comes to vaccinations. Now, can an employer make COVID vaccine a legal precondition to continued employment, or is it possible to fire an employee if the person is an anti-vaxxer? So, Rhonda, could you launch the poll, please?
Can you hear me, Vina? Can you hear me, Vina? Okay, so I'm going to take it from there. So there's a question on, you know, how employers could, you know, really ask questions to organize health and safety on the workplace, especially on vaccination, while we are waiting for Rhonda to pull out the results of our poll. For example, in France, there is a law that is being passed, which indicates that it would be criminal for an employer to ask for a vaccination certificate for employees to return back to work, except there's something, you know, legally provided for, such as, example, you know, undertaker, they have to be vaccinated, or if you organize a very huge event with lots of people, such as a football game or something like that, then yes, you are allowed to ask, otherwise it's going to be criminal. So the answers would be, I mean, half-half around the jurisdictions we're all representing. Only 6% of the speakers and attendees are indicating that employers can ask for a vaccine, I mean, make vaccination a precondition. For the rest of the world, it's either unregulated or absolutely not allowed. I mean, being said that, although there's lots of vaccines, so far not everyone is vaccinated, so it might be a bit too soon for legislation to go that far. But let's see in a few months how it's going to be regulated. Caroline, you wanted to share some issues in the US about that?
Sure. As you can probably guess, we're doing pretty well on vaccinations, but the numbers still aren't where they really should be. So 54% of people residing in the United States currently have received at least one dose, and 46% of our population is fully vaccinated. Unlike most countries, well, first, there is no federal law, and everybody needs to remember we have a dual structure. We have federal laws that apply to all states and the District of Columbia, and then we have 50 states that all have their own sets of laws that if they're more generous than the federal law, those laws prevail for the citizens of that state. So it's very important with regard to vaccines to remember that there is no specific federal law addressing vaccinations as far as whether you can or can't, et cetera. It's left up to the states. And then there are also the health and safety laws, but we have an agency in the US called the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and they have come out with guidance indicating that employers can mandate that employees returning to the office receive full vaccinations, so long as they permit exceptions. Two exceptions. One, if an employee has a health condition that prevents them from obtaining a vaccination safely, and two, if they have a sincerely held religious belief that would require they forego the vaccination, and there are tests for that. Those are the only two exceptions to requiring full vaccination. Companies, though, right now, employers are really grappling with whether to mandate it or make it so attractive that voluntary compliance is what their employees will respond to. Because as you probably know, we have a fairly large anti-vax crowd in the United States that are kind of making it difficult. Oh,
So-
one lawsuit. One court decided, though, that a hospital system in Texas can mandate vaccines, and indicated that if they don't want to get vaccinated, they can find a job somewhere else. Because
Okay.
patient safety and
Wow.
hospital employee safety
Wow.
is the
So it's a direct consequence. Jenny, just going back to you in a moment, but Sharon, on that subject, I heard that in Italy, it's not that definitive as the consequences, but still you can have people be away from the workplace in such case?
Yep, no, absolutely. So basically, as of the 1st of April, there was a decree law passed by the Italian government by our wonderful new Prime Minister, Mario Draghi. We call him Super Mario. He was the head of the European Central Bank, so he's a heavy hitter. And basically, the backdrop to that was so the mandatory inoculation of healthcare workers, both in the public and the private sector, healthcare facilities, care homes, pharmacies, and also medical practices. So came into law 1st of April, and I think quite unusual in the European stage. The backdrop to that was that back in December last year, there was a substantial COVID outbreak in a nursing home in the north of Italy, in Belluno. And it turned out that this cluster had partly been caused by the employees themselves, because 10% of them were anti-vaxxers and had refused the vaccination. So this came to a head in March, and the Prime Minister said, this is unacceptable that healthcare workers who are working directly with patients are refusing vaccination, and on the back of that, the law came into force. These, and of course, it was an ensuing court case by these employees, but the judge held, no, the employer was entitled to insist that they stayed at home. They were allowed to be paid, but they had to stay at home and not come back to work. This will be the case until December. Okay, so this brought a couple of issues in Italy, because we have two kind of opposing principles, whereby the law says on one hand that you can't be obliged to undergo medical treatment, but on the other hand, the civil code gives an obligation on the employer, of course, to adopt all necessary measures to provide a safe workplace for the employees. So as I say, the anti-vaxxers are now, as I say, they have to stay at home if they're working in the healthcare sector. However, this is not to be confused with, you can't discipline them, so you cannot discipline or sack them for being anti-vaxxers, but they have to stay at home actually unpaid, unless they can be found some other job for them out of the way of these poor patients. So basically, they are unfit for work, the employees.
Okay.
So that's the and it's the benchmark also for the public sector, but it's obligatory in the health sector.
Okay, but they're unpaid during that time.
They are unpaid during that time. Yep. So that kind of focuses the mind to perhaps get vaccinated and get back to work.
Yeah, that's a kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
Jenny, you're one of the countries where vaccines are, thriving, and it's there's the most important percentage of vaccinated people in the world. How is it going in your jurisdiction?
I think it's going quite well. We are still grappling with people who don't want to vaccinate. So from the perspective of employers, the health minister has just, last week, I think, or maybe 10 days ago, said to employers to facilitate vaccination for employees by giving them time off for the shots and for recovery should there be side effects. So by and large, people have toed that line even before this statement came out. A lot of my clients and my firm also, we do give time off for people to go and get vaccinated, which is the sort of incentive that you provide to the employees, encouraging them to do that. Moving forward, I know that we are anticipating a lot of testing because that's what's been announced. And in some industries, some higher risk industries, for instance, employers will potentially be allowed to test employees to see whether they have COVID or not, on a more regular basis. So one of the things perhaps is that if you don't want to have something up your nose too regularly, you could perhaps be incentivized to go and be fully vaccinated. Some companies have gone over and beyond just giving a day off or so. I know that Grab, one of the technology-oriented companies here providing ride services like Uber. They're sort of like Uber, but they're not Uber, they're Grab. They do food delivery as well. They have launched a program also to increase the vaccination rates across all their stakeholders. And this includes them saying that they are committed to covering the cost of vaccinations for employees and the employees' immediate family members who are not covered by the national vaccination schemes. Actually, that's not very many in Singapore. The national vaccination scheme covers a large part of things. And I thought this is a fun fact, sort of a fun fact. Encouragement is not just coming from employers; it comes from across many sectors. So taxi companies have said that they will give discounted fares if you go to and from a vaccination center. And my favorite was just announced last week. Shake Shack has said that it will be offering free crinkle cut fries with every burger purchase to anyone who can show them that you've had at least one dose of the vaccine. So I'm going to go to Shake Shack soon.
Best fun fact ever. Yeah, that is such a good incentive, and I think it's great. I think all of these small things just add on to cultural acceptance of vaccination. It's not just a messaging which says go get vaccinated or put the threat into people, but also just encourage it in a more cultural perspective, which is great. I think now coming to the last part of the webinar, which is where we will be doing a little bit of crystal ball gazing and to also take stock of the kind of interesting changes in terms of conditions of work, employment benefit policies that have evolved in the last 1.5 years. So we all know that budgets have been tighter, retention goals have been pressing. There has been a need for enhanced collaboration between people when everyone's working remotely. So we've all seen some very creative and innovative and yet meaningful benefit structures being implemented. And your traditional bonus mechanisms may no longer be sufficient to retain and attract talent, given everyone has a very different perspective on life post-pandemic. So we're just going to run a quick poll and on what the key trends in employee benefits that you all have come across since March 2020. If you have additional interesting ideas, anecdotes, or examples of organizations putting in place benefit structures or employee policies, please do key them in the chat box. We will pick it up. And we're aware that we've taken a little longer than we needed to, and we're very grateful that you all are still with us. Thank you so much. While you key in the responses to the poll, I'm going to request Carolyn for her insights on the trends that she's seen in terms of policies and benefits since March 2020.
Well, I think flexible workplace is the biggest trend. People preferring to have that flexibility, and they will quit a job if they're being ordered to come back to work. And we do anticipate a lot of the major publications are talking about people quitting. We're going to see, not because of really, just because they want that flexibility of remote work. They don't want to commute anymore. But we're not seeing big changes. But in the United States, we've also always had fairly generous benefit packages from a certain level of employee, long-term incentive or bonus plans, but we've always had programs like a 401k pre-tax savings plan. Employers might be upping their matching of employee contributions. Certainly in tech startups, equity is always a big issue, but I think Jenny mentioned it earlier. We're seeing a lot of discussion around mental health benefits and wellness benefits, and also dialogues around, there have been a lot of social issues in the United States over the past year, and employees expecting that their employer will address social issues. And they'll leave a company if they don't think the employer is involved enough or involved the way that they want them to be. So, it's a smorgasbord, and I think it's very dependent on the generation of the worker. Certainly someone my age, I want the 401k and all the cash. But the younger generation, the new generation entering the workforce, it's definitely flexible working and a company that takes a stand on social issues.
Thanks, Carolyn. Fred, what do you have to say on this? What interesting benefits have you seen from a Europe perspective?
Yeah, I think on my side, I'm really representing the poll results we're just seeing, meaning that the most important items that employers would use and employees would be looking at, would be flexible work schedules and flexible workplace. That's the main two important issues I'm viewing and experiencing with, all of the questions, but we don't have time. It might be another webinar or another panel. But all of the issues of not knowing where your employees are, and it's not really a matter of knowing what time it is when you're calling them. It's really a matter of is there a tax risk for you to have an employee there? Is there a social security issue? Is there an application of foreign employment laws issues? And that's really something we're really coping with clients for the time being when we're implementing all of the working from home policies, that we are really trying not to focus too much on COVID-19 or whatever, but now that we've seen that it could be so generalized, we're really trying to, think of all of the consequences that could be there in the future.
Thanks, Fred. In India, what we've seen, in addition to, of course, the flexible work schedules and flexible workplaces, is insurance coverage. A lot of the medical benefits is not available through the government, and therefore support in terms of access to hospitals, in terms of insured medical benefits, has been heavily put in place by organizations, and employees are very grateful, and it has been a retention factor in several organizations. And we all know India did have a rough couple of 2 months where access to medical facilities was limited, and I think that is something that employers stepped in time to take care of. And we're also seeing a lot of employee engagement activities and policies that are being put in place, including mental health related counseling services, activities where people can collaborate informally and socially as well. So those are the kind of, in addition to the monetary terms, I think those are policies and benefits that are playing some kind of role to keep the organization together. Well, I guess this, and I'm just going to quickly check if we have anything in the chat box in terms of other benefits. Well, we don't. Okay, great. So Fred, would you like to wrap this up?
Yeah, first of all, by saying a big thank you to all of our speakers and to the audience who has been, there and faithful as usual, and there until the end, even though we've been beyond schedule. So thank you very much for everyone. Maybe handing it to Caroline, as she's the president of the committee now, and maybe you could, announce what you're going to do next.
That is very mean, but since I'm not prepared
to do another webinar, that's where I'm.
Yeah. So I was going to say, Fred and I have been texting each other during this, and we are going to be planning another webinar for November, and we think possibly the topic to discuss is the disappearing and what we should be doing. We might invite our tax colleagues to webinar because it's very much a tax employment law overlay. If you have, if you'd like to participate, let me know. Hi, Christine Chen. Let us know so that we can include you in our planning, but we really thank you all for attending. And for me, I'm going to say good night to everyone since it's after midnight here in San Francisco.
Wow. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
You stay online for the photo, and thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
So who's taking the photo?
Oh, Vina needs to come back on. I don't know how to take the photo. Oh, do we just take our iPhone?
Give me a second because
I don't even know how to do it. Fred, can you do a screenshot? Is that, or do you just take your iPhone?
Do that.
I'm going to record this too for posterity. This is fun.
We did promise a fun session, didn't we?
Yes.
Here's Matthew.
Hi, Matthew.
Hi from Sydney.
Oh, hi, Matthew.
We don't have a situation. It went bad. It went a bit downhill.
I would have been at the office, but we went into lockdown on Friday.
Oh.
Yeah, so I read.
You've got to keep it into perspective. We've gone into lockdown because we've had 60 cases, 60.
Okay.
Oh,
Nothing there, right?
Yeah.
The UK are back up at nearly 20,000 cases, and it's a complete free-for-all in Britain. So, as you say, in perspective,
yeah.
But just so you all know, the pandemic is over here in California. It's completely over, apparently.
It's official.
No restrictions until we get another wave.
I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with this Delta strain, because that's what's hit us in Sydney. It's not that anybody's been getting sick, but touch wood yet. But the problem is we just, we're way behind with vaccinations. So game plan is to just try and go back to this eradication approach, which we basically had until now. So they've gone hard and early. Our contact, we still know who came in, which room they were staying in, who they transmitted it to, how that was then transmitted to somebody else. We've got, that person went to the mall. We've got the CCTV footage of them standing next to the other person they gave it to. I'm not joking.
Oh my God, no, I know they're not.
Where's the data privacy and all that?
But here's the thing, who cares about data privacy in a global pandemic? It makes me crazy when people talk about data privacy. It's like, come on.
I totally agree, Karen.
Oh, I hate the GDPR.
Yeah.
Well, we're stuck with it as Europeans.
Regulation.
Go on. We do that as well, but I surprise myself telling clients, but I don't believe in that too much. If you want, you can do that, but.
Hey, Matthew, we want an update on Mumbles. How is Mumble?
Mumble and Earl are going strong, but Mumble decided he didn't want to be a wild zebra at the game farm, so he's back with the racehorses.
Oh, but he's not living inside anymore?
No, they put him on the game farm and he just wasn't happy. Every time they went to visit him, he came chasing after the car. So they took him back to the property with the racehorses, and he's still kind of in the house and with Earl, his donkey friend. But they.
This is a zebra who thinks it's a child. It's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, it was hand raised as a baby by friends of mine, who train racehorses and had rescued him. So he grew up in the daughter's bedroom, and that's where he just wants to be, basically.
That's so cute.
Wow.
Only in Australia.
On the armchair, like laying across this armchair in the living room.
I We'll see photos next time.
Yeah.
Mumble has a Facebook. It's a Facebook page, right?
If you just put Mumble into Facebook, he's got his own page.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, so just if you go back just on the data privacy, you know, we've got here, which is very interesting, you know, the contact tracing, and everybody's using a state QR code. So every premises and venue that's open to the public, you just zap the QR code when you go in, and then you check in. They don't enforce the checking out. But we had an incredible breach from a privacy point of view where one guy tested, you know, he went and he wasn't well, he got tested, he was positive, and he gave it to his wife. So there was a huge scramble. Fortunately, this I don't think was Delta. This was about 6 weeks ago or 2 months now. So there was a huge scramble because he had been positive for about 5 days, and they couldn't, we still don't know exactly how he ever got it because he wasn't a return traveler. And he wasn't in contact with anybody. So they now think he possibly must have come across a security guard who had been vaccinated, one of the hotel security quarantine, but so who was carrying it, but just never tested positive. But this guy went to about a dozen barbecue stores all over Sydney. So while he was infectious, they were then notifying. So what happens is that once they pick him up, they go through everywhere he's been, and anybody who's been at those sites gets contacted, and you have to isolate and get tested. And then, you know, you have to stay isolated until you get a negative result, or if you were a close contact, you still have to isolate for 14 days. But nobody could work out why this guy from a wealthy suburb had been barbecue shopping at every store there was. And somehow the newspaper, it got out for who he was and what his name is. And that hit the press. And he's actually he's a director or CEO of a venture capital fund that was actually because in the press he's known as Mr. Barbecue. But they were actually looking at buying this entire barbecue franchise business. So he was doing due diligence.
Oh.
So,
you know,
not only personal data, but a business trade secret.
Yeah, potentially there. Huge thing if that had been like a public company where suddenly you realize these guys are out to purchase in terms of competitors running on a share price. And it's funny that, again, everything's just being swept under the carpet because, it's a pandemic. But I thought, it was outrageous because also people will stop scanning in if they know you're not protected.
Yeah.
So there we go. That's the updates from down under.
Thanks so much, Matthew.
Yeah, you guys did a great job. You in New Zealand. I mean, you personally, Matthew, of course, but you and
no, look, it's been a very different approach. We were lucky, but the problem is what's scary for us right now is that we're only at 4% vaccination rate, and suddenly this Delta strain has proven that the quarantine, using hotel quarantines in the...
You're muted.
We can't hear you anymore.
Matthew, you muted yourself.
So we're still trying to see whether or not we can contain this strain. And if we, so really for us, it's quite scary. It's like March last year, where it's only just getting into the community and spreading for the first time. So we'll see if these hard lockdowns for the next 2 weeks manage to get a lid back on it. That's the...
Guys, I'm going to log off.
Yeah, no, I must let you guys go as well. It's very late for time, but thanks again for an excellent session, and good to see you all.
It's good
to meet you, Matthew.
Yeah,
Okay.
nice to meet you, Alberto.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, ciao, tutti. Bye.
No sharing.
Okay, now, ciao.
Ciao.
Bye,
Ciao. Well done, Fred.
everyone.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhoda.
Bye, Fred.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.